Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and this is the Sig Romeo2 red dot sight. I waited quite some time to get my hands on one of these. I first saw this in the Sig booth. I believe it was shot 2019. Almost a year after that, Sig invited me to come out to Sig Electronic Optics in Oregon and take a tour, and that's exactly what I did. And then I got more of a hands-on with what became, or what was called at the time, the Romeo 2, which is the name that they stuck with. This is Sig's first major handgun optic since the Romeo 1, and it does share a likeness or a similarity with the Romeo 1. Mainly the first thing I noticed getting into it was the clarity and the dot crispness, and that's one thing I did like about the Romeo 1, still do like about the Romeo 1, is you're not going to find a cleaner spherical lens, and I will stake quite a bit on that. With the optics that exist today, as of filming this video, there really was no cleaner optic than that Romeo 1 until the Romeo 2 came along. One of the things that we generally run into with red dot sights is some degree of a notch filter or some kind of tinting on the lens, and also, depending on the type of lens, a spherical versus Maglin lens, distortion that may occur at the corners or some aberration in the glass that can cause parallax issues or perception issues or distortion issues, causing things to look different than what they really are when looking through the optic. And the notch filter, that bluish tint that you see with some optics, has been a general point of concern for some shooters. I generally don't, it doesn't bother me. But I would prefer it wasn't there if I had the choice. That notch filter is there for battery life. So first thing I did mounting this, and the thing that makes it stand apart from almost every other optic that's currently on the market, is it comes with different shrouds. So I have a base optic that's an open emitter, and then I can add a half shroud or a full shroud, which has an optional rear window, so I can create an enclosed optic. And for the testing purposes, I was going to test it in the full, most durable configuration, which would be the full shroud with that rear window. Now, you're putting the rear window in there when you assemble it. It's got a little axle, it locks in, it locks down, it's got a Torx, T6 Torx on either side. The window sits in there and you put it together yourself. So one of the concerns that's already come up when I posted about this in social media is, well, it's not going to be nitrogen or purged by some other type of gas. Is that going to cause condensation issues? If you can keep moisture out of there when you assemble it, it's not going to be a big deal. What I did is I set the gun on my workbench with a space heater, and I let everything get nice and warm and dry, and then I assembled it, and then I started the 2,000 round review process, mounting it to a Sig P320. It's a side load 1632 battery, and it has the Delta Point Pro footprint, almost. And I say almost because of the side load battery location, they had to forego those front recoil bosses. So if your Delta Point Pro footprint has the forward 2 posts, not going to work. You're going to need a footprint that doesn't have those, which should be easily, aftermarket plates are going to be readily available if they're not already. It worked very, very well mounted directly to my P320, although this is a newer optics ready P320. Had this for, I think, a little over a year now. So if you bought your P320 in that time frame, it's probably going to fit right on there. If you have a strict Delta Point Pro cut or footprint, those posts are going to have to come off, because there's just no way you're going to get this optic on there if you end up buying the optic. We'll get to my recommendation as the video goes on. I've got multiple daylight, multiple low light-ish brightness settings, and then I've got night vision specific settings. One thing that, you know, kind of concerned me, even though I had played with the optic at the factory, I hadn't actually really shot it. Not enough to really have a very strong opinion about it either way. So once I got it on the gun, I wanted to use it in as many varied conditions as possible, as many weather conditions as possible. A lot of the things that I do for optics testing don't ever actually get filmed because they're kind of boring. I'm not going to put a camera in the freezer with the gun and the camera showing, you know, heating, and a lot of the one-handed manipulations don't get filmed. There's just a lot of stuff that doesn't necessarily get filmed, but it's all part of my normal optic evaluation process, which is focused for duty optics. I would consider this, and I think Sig would agree, that they're kind of marketing this towards and pushing this towards, and it was designed for a hard or a duty or a military use. So that was exactly how I was going to test it. The first 500 rounds was just a get-to-know-you phase of me and the optic getting used to it. Dot clarity, the spherical lens it's beautiful. There's a lot of lenses out there. There's a lot of optics that I would recommend that don't have as clean of a lens as this. And one of the things that I really appreciate about this spherical lens versus some of the ones I've used from other manufacturers is I've noticed with some other spherical lenses that there is still some distortion present based on the angle of the glass or just the nature of the optic in general. Also, their LED emitter is very good. It gives a nice crisp dot that is strong, and even in reduced lighting conditions or fast transitions from target to target or shooting it under night vision, I don't have any flicker or fading or any issues like that. Once I got comfortable with the optic, I went ahead, the first 500 rounds, I went ahead and did the 500 round burn down. If you're not familiar, it's 500 rounds as quickly as possible to see if the round count in such a short period of time would identify any issues you wouldn't notice with the same round count over a much longer period of time. So 3 to 4 minutes versus 3 to 4 hours, days, weeks, months, and so on. So here's your burn down. First to last round, no issues, no flickering, no fading. Most of the heat generated on the handgun is going to be near the chamber, which does hang out in the neighborhood of the optic, but heat didn't cause any issues with the electronics or the optic or any issues with the glass. This particular P320 does not have a loaded chamber indicator, so I didn't have a lot of back spray coming up onto my lens. Also, this ships with a loaded chamber indicator accessory which can mount in the front notch of the optic when you put it on the gun. So if your P320 does have a loaded chamber indicator, or the gun you mounted on does have a loaded chamber indicator, it creates a little deflection path right there that's going to keep some of that nonsense from getting in the lens of your optic when you shoot more than 3 or 4 rounds. Generally, guns that have LCIs, you put 20, 25 rounds, especially range quality ammunition, through them, and your lens needs to be cleaned off a little bit if that's something you're worried about. The next 1,000 rounds was using the optic in as many varied conditions as I could possibly come up with. Ammunition, I fired a lot of 147, 115, 115 plus P, 124 plus P, and of course regular 124, but a little bit less of that because that's usually the ammo I use for zeroing purposes. I can't say enough good things about the clarity of the glass, the quality of the dot, the ease of controls. Controls are recessed, which is not really something I worry about for duty purposes, but something I would be concerned about for concealed carry. Your holster pressing against it, or if you're left-handed, your buttons will face out and they will interact with the environment, bending over counters or stuff like that. You wouldn't think it'd be the big deal, but I've seen some other optics where you could inadvertently knock the adjustments off. It has motion sense, their MOTAC system, so you set it down, you leave it alone for a while, it turns off, which is going to prolong an already good battery life I'm getting from a side load 1632 battery, which is a toolless removal. All I need to do is press on this little panel in the back, press in nice really hard. I can pull that tray out. The tray's got a detent system into it. New battery in, throw it back in the gun. It's good to go. Definitely paying attention to that throughout the review, as well as the T6s that hold on the shroud, and of course the overall mounting. It's recommended 28 inch-pounds torque for mounting directly to the slide, which is going to give me a very, very solid mounting. Some other optics are like half of that. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that just shows me the robust nature that it can handle that, which I do appreciate because I can be kind of hard on these things. Under low light, I had the dot adjustment, the bright adjustments that I needed. I set it for 1 brightness, pretty much just looked down range during the day right after, I got ready to, or right before I got ready to zero it. I was like, that's a good brightness. And I haven't really taken it off that brightness at all, except for to check the night vision features. But shooting it under low light, it gave me the high contrast dot quality that I would expect, and that goes back to me being a really big fan of their reticle, their performance. And of course the glass is part of that. Even though the glass is already only in front of one eye, most of the data of my sight picture is taken through that window. So a lot of my downrange, my non-dominant eye is picking up the conditions of the target or based on the distance or something like that and being target focused, but I'm still going to notice any kind of decrease in light transmission. And that's something that we worry about with certain types of lenses, notch filters, things like that, is they may look good during the day, but in low light conditions, am I still going to have the same clarity that I need to be able to not have to use occluded shooting? I would like to avoid that if possible. Not an issue with this optic. Under night vision, of course, light transmission is a bigger deal looking through a night vision device. Sometimes adding 1, 2 lenses in front of your night vision, be your 14, your 15s, your 31s, whatever night vision device you happen to be using, can darken your available sight picture, especially if you're running a monocular. That's going to be a big deal because that's the only data you're getting. Whereas if I'm running, like me, I use PVS 15s, I'm still picking up a little bit of my data from the tube, if you will, that the gun is not aligned to. And I just see the image of the dot floating there in front of my face, but it can cut down on the available data I'm getting because the lens is blocking some of the light from transmitting through to my night vision device. Night vision settings are good. I don't really use night vision settings, but I did test them, of course, for the review purposes, and they do provide a very crisp, clean dot that doesn't have a really noticeable degree of blooming. Blooming is part optic and part night vision device. So depending on the halo that's present in your chosen night vision device, that can magnify what would otherwise be a good dot and make it have an extreme halo and make the dot size see 2, 3, 4 times larger than it normally would. So if you've got good night vision, you're definitely going to appreciate the night vision settings on this. If you have okay night vision, you're still going to appreciate them. And if you have really poor night vision, well, good luck. The shroud, I definitely feel like mentioning the fact that the optic itself has a built-in shroud. And it's now inside a secondary shroud, so almost like a camper shell. And it extends out a little bit further than the shroud for the optic, so I've got a little bit of overhang protection. So if I'm doing one-hand manipulation or something like that, I don't necessarily have to worry about inadvertent contact to the lens. It also extends to the rear around that plexiglass window. I like that. I like that they did that. They extended it out a little bit on both sides. One thing that I was concerned with, not super concerned, but it was something I was like, I wonder if that could go wrong, was the axle that you use to mount the optic. Or mount, I should say, the shroud to the optic body. I was like, I wonder, just because it's like just a little bit of tendon, I wonder if this thing during a drop test, if it hit right now, if I could break that axle. I wasn't worried about the T6s that screw into the body of the optic itself for the mounting, but I was worried about the plexiglass shroud window in the rear and that little axle, because it does seem like a very thin piece of metal. So that was one of my biggest concerns going into the drop test. As you know, I do a drop test every 500 rounds. For video purposes, a 2,000 round review, that's going to be 4 drop tests. Prior to a drop test, 0 check. So here's a 5-round group I fired at 25 yards on 124 grain gold dot prior to beginning the 2,000 round review process. And then, of course, throughout the 2,000 round reviews, every 500 rounds, it got a shoulder height drop test on either concrete, pavement, or flagstone. Here's your drops. There's 2 elephants in this room. One of them is after the final drop, and I did make it through 4, as you just saw. Was there any permanent damage or issues with the optic itself? And of course, did it maintain 0? The answer to the first question is, I was not able to break this thing. I was not able to scratch, crack, or any way disturb either lens, be it front or the rear removable lens that's part of the full shroud configuration. So as far as durability goes, this thing is significantly more durable than the Romeo 1. Which I know some people were probably wondering about. The Romeo 1 was never intended for kind of stuff that I did to it all those years ago when I made a video about the Romeo 1, then the Romeo 1 Pro. It was intended to be a very clean lens with a very good quality dot and just be used for general purpose shooting, not for duty carry. Although some people do use it for that purpose. Those people should buy a Romeo 2. 0. Here's a 5-round group I fired after the final drop test. Same distance, 25 yards with a 124 grain gold dot. I'd call that 0 maintained. Not only 0 maintained, but durability maintained. Again, this is only 2,000 rounds and it's only 4 drops. But everybody's got their bar of what they consider, okay, at this point, this optic I would consider reliable. I'd trust my life to it. I'd carry it on duty. I conceal carry it, what have you. The versatility of this optic is really the big selling point, I think. It comes in 2 dot sizes, but it also comes in 3 separate configurations. You can use it naked, you can use it with a bikini, or you can use it fully dressed up for the winter and for the hard, cold, uncaring world that is out there when it comes to using firearms professionally. My advice would be, if you're going to use this optic, just put it in the full configuration, because why not? The big concern, of course, is because it's not purged, condensation is going to get in there. It's going to cause fogging issues. And for some people, that's like, well, that negates the purpose of an enclosed emitter optic. Absolutely not. Condensation or moisture is just one potential advantage of an enclosed optic. To me, the larger advantage is the fact that now I can't inadvertently get dirt, debris, ice, rain, water in there. That's, to me, the biggest advantage of an enclosed optic. Whether it's purged or not, it's all about the assembly process. You're going to be assembling it yourself, so you're the QC officer there, and you're going to be in control of making sure it's put together properly in a very dry environment to negate that possibility. All optics can fog if not properly cared for. What I did with mine is preventative measures. Like I said, I assembled it in a very dry environment, and I also put cat crap anti-fogging on the inside of the lens and on the outside of the lens, as well as the front lens of the optic itself. And over the 2,000 rounds in varied processes, this video, of course, is filmed early 2022 in the winter. I was able to shoot it out in the extreme cold for the brief 20-25 minutes of cold, actual cold sub-zero weather. I wouldn't say sub-zero, freezing weather that we get here in Georgia. A little bit of rain time with it, and using it at night. And in Georgia, when the sun goes down, the moisture, precipitation, or the general humidity seems to go through the roof. So using it in night conditions, I definitely was able to appreciate whether or not I was going to have any condensation or fogging issues because the optic is not purged. I personally did not experience any issues throughout the review process, and as long as it's done and assembled right, like I said, I don't think you're going to have any issues either. Would I recommend this optic? Yes, absolutely, 100%, especially if you already have a duty gun in this footprint. I would also recommend it to somebody who's seeking out an option for an enclosed emitter optic. What a time to be alive. There are so many good optic choices now versus a year ago, versus 2 years ago, versus 3 years ago. Everyone is going the direction of enclosed emitters. I think what Sig did with the Romeo2 was they said, hey, if you want to run an open emitter, you can. If you want to run a closed emitter, we got that too. Also, as another cool feature, if I experience damage to my rear lens or the shroud or something that's in part of that package, I can get replacement parts. And I'm sure aftermarket guys are probably going to come up with some cool ideas for the way that this optic works as well for issues that some other people might identify. It's got built-in sights, so if you built-in iron sights, I should say. So if you have a footprint that does not have a rear sight, as some Delta Point Pro-esque footprints have, it's got a rear iron sight built into, and then would negate, well, not negate, but it could make it a little bit more refined as far as your front suppressor height sight, giving you a cleaner package. But the overall window of this thing, you've got a lot of data coming in just through the optic window because of the overall size versus some of the other optics that are out there. It's got a wider presentation, more horizontal window than some of the other optics that are out there. It does have a wider footprint because of that, but it's going to work very, very well native to like a Sig P320 type product. I would also throw this thing on a regular mount and run it on like a submachine gun or as a backup top mount or 45-degree offset mount on a rifle in the full configuration, because this thing can handle quite a lot of abuse. During those 4 drop tests, I didn't have any zero issues, obviously, but everything stayed tight. Battery compartment stayed closed, and of course it, you know, just held up, and I didn't have any damage happen to the optic itself. So I'm really happy with this. I always want to take a second or third or fourth or fifth or sixth look at optic companies that make new optics. So even if I've had bad experiences with their optics in the past, I want every optic to be good. And it's nice to see that Sig was listening to the feedback of the shooting community, both professional users, concealed carry users, competition users, and they incorporated those features into a very robust, very versatile optic that I would highly recommend. I'm Aaron Count with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.